So I just want to put the situation we're in some kind of context. Of course, there were the early years when gas was being flared offshore, and there was a vision for an industrial estate to be formed in Point Lisas. FedChem, by W.R. Grace at that time, was the company that started to take gas and go downstream for the first time in 1959, which I joined sometime later in 1982. Then, of course, we went through a period where there was quite a lot of plants built. Government started off with its ownership in some of these downstream industries and later retreated, and we went through a revival process, only to become, of course, the largest ammonia exporters, methanol exporters, and 4 LNG plants going up in a matter of 5 years from 1999. And of course, you would have seen that the treadmill that we were, walking on suddenly took a steep rise. That is the context in which sets the stage for our current situation. And of course, as you see in 2011 to 2016, we know the story there. If we look at how the industry has grown in this period, you can see that there has been a number of plants that NGC, which only formed really in 1975 and therefore is close to 42 years in business, played an important role not only as transporter, but also as merchant, as an aggregator that was actually taking out a lot of the imbalances, managing risk of supply with a growing number of plants in the industry. That story is not to be forgotten. Of course, we know that NGC has become an investor in blocks upstream. We have already started that process in the value chain, and an important part as a catalyst in developing business in the industrial estate. And you see a number of plants shown by those numbers taking place with a very steep rise. Of course, the contribution to GDP from the energy sector, a lot of people don't understand, probably in the general public, that this has been up to 51% as far back as 2008. Of course, that has dropped significantly less in these years where we have reduced petrochemical prices and, of course, reduced volumes. And now we are at the point where we also have all the upstream and downstream contracts expired or expiring. So it's quite a challenge to face at this point in time in the industry, no doubt about it. And of course, as we heard from Shetil in Rystad Energy yesterday, it's not a big surprise when you have a very steep curve like this and a treadmill that you're running on, and the upstream investment is not in time to meet future supply. And on top of that, the success rate of that upstream investment has declined for some years. So in a way, the lesson that we heard yesterday is that the importance of looking ahead, the importance of understanding our depletion rates, the importance of decline, and the importance of making those investments at the right timing is going to be a critical factor for the future. Angeline, we hear, of course, a lot of conversation about that, and Norm keeps making the point, this is not a threat. This is about the real situation where Juniper is going to fall off in 2019. So the issue of fiscal incentives, this whole discussion about negotiations, are real issues at this current time, no doubt about it. So as we look at the domestic or petrochemical and LNG consumption, we see that LNG has certainly played a major role here, and that has changed since 2003, as we know. But I think it's important to talk about the issue of power, because I know that hasn't come up in this first day session. But I think there's an important national discourse required on the use of energy on the island, and we kind of hear glimpses and talks about it in terms of renewables. I think it's also encouraging to read in the papers this morning, TGU considering wind as an alternative fuel. And I think these are important conversations, because if you look at it in the context that we supply tea and tech. NGC supplies tea and tech to the tune of 5 to 6 plants on the estate. We have plants that are currently not running or reduced rates, but there's no change in behavior in terms of a country, how we're using the gas, what is our behaviors towards it. So I think there is a national discourse required on the use of energy. It's having a bearing at a critical time when we're using gas for electricity. I thought I'd make that point. And you see, it's not only that it's significant, we also see projected increases in electricity and gas demand. So NGC, as you know, is playing a wider role in boosting CNG as an alternative fuel. So if we get into some of the thought process, and I must say that I issue a caveat that whatever I show here is still subject to the final approvals of the Standing Committee of Energy. The Gas Master Plan is still being discussed. So I put that caveat on, but I thought I would demonstrate what NGC is thinking and clearly try to communicate that. And I would say that there are 4 main pillars. You would have heard our chairman, of course, talking yesterday on the panel on securing gas supply, and we would have heard we know about the initiatives cross-border with Venezuela and our workings with Shell there and so on. So gas supply, I will get to that in a few minutes, but of course we are doing every efforts now in our negotiations to advance those as quickly as possible to secure gas for the future, and we are certainly getting involved in the conversations with marginal fields. It is good to see that we have a partner like Perenco in the TSP block. So, and we know Perenco has a good track record of taking mature fields and boosting supply. So it's good to see what their plan turns out to be sometime during the course of 2017. Then, of course, we have there was a lot of talk about institutional building. I'll get to that on the next slide. And the other pillar is, of course, looking across the value chain. There's a lot of discussion right now about NGC's role as transporter, as aggregator, and merchant. Clearly, NGC is thinking not only as a transporter, but of course, I think the important issue now, particularly at a time of shortfall, particularly at a time where plants are at reduced rates, at knife's edge, with some unplanned shutdowns going on the upstream side, it's important the role of the aggregator is also engaging in those conversations with the upstream, which we are doing, and working quite collaboratively with Shell and the BHPs and so on. And I think those discussions hopefully will yield a better result at a time when it's difficult. And that's what we're doing. And of course, we're looking at diversifying our value chain and being more engaged, not only in Trinidad, but also in other jurisdictions. We still have a role to play in the community, but of course, our CSR budget is substantially reduced, as you can imagine. And if you look at the institutional building, capacity building question, a lot of that was talked about, as you know, in the first day. We need to strengthen the institutions in Trinidad. That was a theme yesterday. So what is NGC doing? Certainly, we are looking at partnering with the government in terms of implementing a well-defined regulatory framework. We're looking at the areas of safety in the organization. We're looking at the areas of asset integrity. We know that NGC has not been above average on the national facilities audit, so that will also get some attention. We are improving the competencies in the organization, so you would have seen several advertisements in the papers over the last months, starting with safety, who we now have. Kurt Cadet is our senior manager in safety, and of course reporting to the president level. And then of course you would have seen advertisements focusing on procurement and focusing on commercial. So we are trying to build the institutional capacity. And another aspect here is that we have a lot of talent in the NGC group. We have the PPGPL company, we have National Energy, we have CNG. So we are trying to operate as a wider team and also build on the competencies we have to face the challenges that are before us, and also to explore the business opportunities that we've heard about. The options for supply, we are looking at all alternatives, and Trinidad needs to explore all options, which I'll get to later. And of course, there's a lot of discussions now on the pricing, on the volumes, on the security of supply. A lot of those issues are advanced stages in negotiations, so obviously I can't talk too much in detail about that. But you can see that we can either have a view that looks like Mount Trinidad, as Shetil called it yesterday, or we have a view that says, you know, after 2017, yes, we have Croc, we have Juniper, they prevent the decline, they actually helping us plateau out. But we need a transition phase, we need a transformation phase, and that means focusing on new supply, focusing on working with the upstream, focusing on cross-border initiatives, and focusing across the entire value chain. I think that's best for Trinidad and Tobago. And if we take some of the, I guess, further thinking that we have, we've already started 4 years ago. NGC has already gotten involved in marketing and trading. There's a lot of room for opportunity there. We've also gotten into third-party trading, where we have partnered with some key players who have been in the business a lot longer than we have been, and we started to actually diversify some of the income streams that we have. So the marketing and product trading, you will find, will take a bigger and bigger profile, not only as NGC, but as a group. And that's the idea. You will see, I have no numbers or timelines here, right? And that's deliberate, because, as I said, a lot of that is still being discussed in the background. So I don't want to be held accountable for saying, yes, I said 2017 or 18. But you can see the thinking is, of course, to accelerate negotiations. The thinking, of course, is to explore the cross-border gas, which we now have a government-to-government arrangement with, and we are going to go further there. The Venezuela issue is an important one because, of course, we keep talking about Dragon, and Dragon, of course, has a few TCF of gas, but we know that when we go beyond that to the Patao, Millones, and Rio Caribe, we are talking close to 13 TCF. So that adds some gas out in time, not in the short term. And of course, we are looking, or Trinidad should be looking, at all the options in terms of even importing gas, as crazy as it sounds. But you can see one of the examples, Australia, which I happen to know fairly well, and that also happens to be a place where we know is going to be one of the largest LNG exporters in the world once the other 4 or 5 plants comes on stream. Gorgon just came on stream, as you know, humongous plant, lots of overruns. And we have a very steep curve, as you see in Australia, the same way. But if you look at the domestic industry in Australia, there isn't an NGC. There's a lot of discussion between upstream and downstream, directly. It's a first come, first serve. So if I'm a petrochemical plant in Australia, I actually have to go run behind an upstream supplier, try to beg for gas, and the rest is to catch. So I don't think that's a model that Trinidad and Tobago should adopt. I've seen it firsthand, and it's resulting in a lot of crisis across there. If not now, it will be in the future. The same issues apply in Australia. If you look at the upstream development, it's tapered off. If you look at the success rate, it's tapered off. So Australia is facing the same situation, right? If not now, in the future. And if you look at some of the trends right now, Australia, as the largest LNG exporter, is also currently discussing importation of gas. Strangely enough. Now, there's about 30 projects worldwide with floating units. There's another 40 in the pipeline. We now have, well, you had in the year 2000, you had 11 countries importing gas. You now have about 30, and by the next decade, you're probably talking about 50. And a lot of the gas is not in the regions where they're producing the gas. So what is changing here? The technology. And the technology is actually driving some of the movements here. Trinidad, therefore, needs to explore this. Perhaps it's feasible, perhaps it's not, but at least we have to be thinking outside the box. We have to be thinking all solutions, and at least we're not standing by. Abu Dhabi is importing and exporting gas, by the way. So, in a nutshell, I see I have a couple minutes left. I can assure you these slides were prepared before the talk yesterday. So none of these were altered. So if they happened to align very well yesterday, it means we have a good alignment in industry. If they're not, it means there's some discussion still to be had, all right? But in the case of government, we talked about allocation. And I think that's an important issue, particularly when we have shortfalls, and particularly when we have exports and plants that are running in the petrochemical sector. So we know the gas master plan has some issues around that. That is not a decision for NGC, but that is clearly helping in some of the clarity in going forward. Policy for alternative energy, we heard that there's some issues coming around in the future when it comes to renewables. And as I said before, this needs some national discourse if we have to make some impacts as a country. The institutional capacity message is not lost, and clearly you see how NGC is trying to boost its commercial skills, legal skills in the organization. Upstream, there are some fundamental changes in power and how we structure that. Marginal fields need some incentives, and of course the investments in upstream and Angeline and so on continue to be very important conversations. NGC itself is trying to transform for the future, and it is trying to seek new business across the value chain, locally and internationally. To do that, you cannot be a transporter alone. To do that, you also need to have the understanding of the value chain, and I don't mean NGC alone. I mean the conversation of the value chain is becoming more and more important at the government level and, of course, with the companies that we are talking with. So we believe that the value is created across the entire value chain, not only in Trinidad, but across others. We talked about efficiencies and energy, and, of course, the challenging times that we face need solutions which are requiring a lot of courage, as we heard yesterday. It requires vision, and it requires good relationships with the people, even though we're at a very hard crossroad and difficult times. So I would end with, why did I take this job? You know? And I would say, look, it couldn't be at a worse, more challenging time in the industry, as a lot of us know. But I think a lot of us have Trini blood flowing through our veins, and that applies not only in NGC. I guess the opportunity as president in NGC to meet a lot of dedicated nationals in Trinidad working across the chain and globally in Africa and Australia and so on, wherever I've been roaming around, tells me that there's a lot of intellectual power, there's a lot of talent in Trinidad, and if we have to get these opportunities for the future and I guess ride through this tough wave, we stay focused on the direction that we need to go, but we work collaboratively as an industry. Thank you very much.